Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's daily devotional. Appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. So, for our daily devotional today, there's an article that I'd like to consider coming from. It was published a day ago, and let's see if I can bring this up here. There we go. So here's the article from the Roman Catholic Pope, or the Catholic Pope. Gossiping is plague worse than COVID. He said the devil is the biggest gossiper who is seeking to divide the church with his lies. If there's one thing that's even worse than the COVID-19 pandemic, that should be according to the Pope, it's what goes on by the water cooler, over the back fence, at the hair salon, and apparently at the Vatican. Gossip. Please, brothers and sisters, let's try to not gossip, Pope Francis said about Catholic Church divisions during his weekly blessing. Gossip is a plague worse than COVID. Worse. Let's make a big effort, no gossiping. Reports said he stopped speaking from his prepared text to pounce freely on his frequent complaint about gossiping within church communities and the Vatican bureaucracy. He refused to get into specific details, but he said the devil is the biggest gossiper who is seeking to divide the church with his lies. He was speaking about a gospel passage on the nature of the hypocrisy between private voice and public face, the need to correct others privately when they do something wrong. And it kind of goes on to describe some of the kind of the specific context from what he's describing here. So first, there's two things I want to draw from this. Certainly, I don't want to diminish or dismiss the issue of gossip. In fact, gossip is something you don't hear about a whole lot. You don't hear it taught on a whole lot or defined a whole lot. That doesn't mean it's not wrong. It is wrong. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it here in just a minute. It is interesting that he compares it to a plague worse than COVID. I don't know. And apparently, he said the way this is described in this article, he stopped speaking from his prepared text to pounce freely on his frequent complaint about gossiping within church communities. Again, gossip is wrong, and certainly everyone, all those seeking to desire to please God, all those desiring to please God, or those seeking to please God, should not gossip. And as I said, we will define that phrase or that term gossip here in just a moment. But it's interesting to me that the quote-unquote leader of the Catholic Church here is making gossip out to be worse than COVID. Sin certainly is a plague worse than COVID. And of course, we've talked lately about the equality of all sins. But apparently gossip is kind of a big thing with him, and I don't know why that's such a big thing to him. Why it apparently, like I said, it's his frequent complaint about gossiping within church communities. Obviously, certainly, like I said, I don't want to diminish from the fact that gossip is wrong, but it's just interesting to me that the leader of the Roman Catholic Church is making such a big deal about gossip, when certainly there are all sin is a big deal. I mean, other sins are a plague worse than COVID as well. But regardless, okay, looking at the concept of gossip for a moment, it is important to understand what gossip is. In fact, a lot of people don't really understand what gossip is. This is from dictionary.com. Gossip is defined as idle talk or rumor, especially about the personal or private affairs of others. Also, the way it's described, gossiper, a person given to tattling or idle talk. to talk idly, especially about the affairs of others. Most often, when we talk about gossip, one of the most, I guess, broad definitions of gossip is to talk to another person, to talk to someone about a third party when you might be speaking rumor, you might be speaking falsehood. Certainly falsehood would be bearing false witness, or you might be speaking the truth. I mean, the words that you say might be true as in association with gossip, but the purpose or the focus of what you say is to diminish or to the detriment of that third party. Okay, to diminish how they are viewed in the eyes of others, to tear them down, or to certainly idle talk in and of itself speaks to talk that has no good purpose. Okay, no good purpose. And it's one thing to speculate. Now, gossip, again, it has more of a salacious type of mentality to it. You can sit down and make chit-chat, okay, what we would phrase as small talk. That's not idle talk. Sitting down and talking about your sports team and whether or not they're going to make it to the playoffs or whatever. That's small talk. That's not idle talk. Again, idle talk tends to focus on has more of a salacious motivation, malicious to a certain extent, and again, it's about a third party. And I have a friend of mine. He's a preacher, but but I've known him. Well, our families have known each other for a long time. J.R. Rosado. But one of the phrases that I've always appreciated about him that he holds to and that he lives by is that if this is not something that you would say to this individual or in front of this individual, it's best not to say it at all. And I really appreciate, and I've always appreciated that all the way back to Florida College. That was something that he that kind of how he defined gossip is if it's not something that you would be willing to say in front of this individual or to this individual, then it's best not to be said. And I think that's a generally a pretty good way of determining, is this gossip or is it not? If this is not something that you would not want to get back to the individual, or if this is not something that you would not admit to that individual face to face, then it's best not to say it. Now, obviously, there are times when you may talk to for instance, when elders talk amongst each other, or when a preacher and elders or whatnot may speak to one another about a member of the congregation. And this is, something that one of them observed, that they're concerned about, or maybe it's just brothers and sisters in Christ. Maybe there's, two brothers talking about another brother from the perspective that, hey, this is something that I've encountered. Have you encountered the same thing? Am I overlooking this? It's if it's out of concern, or if it's out of trying to work out how to handle something, that's not gossip. It only becomes gossip when you start allowing, again, the salacious or malicious intent or design to it, or for that matter, if your goal or the purpose is to tear down that individual in the eyes of another. And that's where gossip tends to come in. And this term comes up in variations in the New Testament. But we certainly see it here in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and in verse 13. And this is in the context of the widows who are widows indeed, and what Paul wants the younger widows to do who do not qualify as widows indeed. He says, refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they've cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. And again, Paul's describing the issue regarding younger women and the possibility of these younger women, because they have so much time on their hands, ultimately, they get into things that they really shouldn't. They start gossiping, they start doing things that they shouldn't, and instead of serving God, they began to think about what they want and allow those things to distract them from their service to God. But again, verse 13, the King James has tattlers here for gossips. And it is interesting because the term tattling, it's not, if you see a brother or sister do something wrong, certainly you should go to that brother or sister. However, there are plenty of occasions where a situation arises where you may go and speak to the elders about that particular situation and say, I'm not sure how to handle this, will you go with me, or whatnot, and that's fine too. But the term tattler speaks not so much to the action as to the motivation. The motivation of a tattler is to get the other person in trouble, or to attempt to tear down that other individual. Again, that's what gossip is. It's not about speaking about a third party to another person for their, hey, please pray for this person, or how should we handle this situation. It speaks more to tearing down that person in the eyes of another. And so that's what verse 13 is also talking about. Remember, we talked about idle talk. They are busybodies. They learn to be idle, verse 13. Also gossips and busybodies, saying things that they ought not. And again, verse 13, in addition to the physical actions that's being described, or physical words that are being said, it speaks to the motives. It speaks to the intent for which these things are being said. So certainly gossip is something that we should be aware of. Again, it's really not preached on a whole lot. I think probably, and I'm not necessarily saying that as a condemnation of sermon content necessarily. I think generally speaking, the thought process is, if we nip it in the bud, or cut it off at the pass, so to speak, with the intent and motivation of what we say and why we say it, then we will avoid the idea or the concept of gossip. We'll avoid doing those things. But certainly it is worth discussing gossip and the danger of gossip and defining what gossip means. However, having said that, I don't agree with making the statement, especially from a relative perspective, that gossip is a plague worse than COVID. Sin is a plague worse than COVID. All sins are. Any sin is. Certainly gossip is wrong. But it sounds as though, for whatever reason, quote-unquote Pope Francis, this is kind of it's kind of a thing with him, gossiping. And apparently it's something that it really bothers him, the whole idea of gossip. And certainly gossip can tear a congregation of God's people apart if it's not, if it's not addressed, for sure. And gossip definitely needs to be taken out of our way of talking with people, and we do need to be aware of it, because it can very easily creep in when maybe the beginning or the initial thought process is to talk about how to handle a situation, or to say, hey, this brother or sister's dealing with this, please pray for them, or whatnot. The line there can get very blurry when you start moving into other areas or other motivations other than good intentions about the things that we say. So like I said, generally speaking, as this brother kind of allowed himself to define gossip, is if it's not something that you wouldn't want your brother or sister hearing you say, or you wouldn't actually admit to them face to face, then generally speaking, it's best not to say it to anyone else. I think as a general rule, that's true. That's true. All right, so hopefully this is something. I mean, obviously this is something that is a little bit different, talking about gossip, but it's certainly. I want to emphasize. I don't want to diminish the potential sinfulness of talking and then allowing that talk to become gossip. That's sinful, and we have to beware of that. We have to be careful about that. And so I don't want to diminish gossip by discussing what the Pope's saying here. I just think that it's a missed opportunity. Let's put it that way. It's a missed opportunity to draw attention to all sin, and he could have included gossip as an example, but he kind of focused in on gossip as if that's a really, 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 that this is worse than other things, and it's not. It's just as bad as other things. All right. So keep in mind tomorrow is Wednesday. So we will have our Bible study and hymns at 7 o'clock tomorrow. So Lord willing, I will see you all then. Thanks, everybody.